Good day. What a pleasure it is to initiate our 117th webinar in a row. This is our 117th month in a row for our TMIT National Research Testbed webinars. I'm Charles Denham. I'll be your host today, and I am on slide 2 of the slides that we have for the program. I have a couple of housekeeping details. First off, make sure that the volume on your computer is tuned up to the max, that your WebEx volume is turned up to the max, and that your external speakers, if you're using them, are turned up to the max. If you don't get good audio by doing that, then on the next slide, you'll see that you can click on an icon and request a phone number. And that is on slide 4 of the slide deck. Slide 5, for those that don't have the slides, please go to www.safetyleaders.org, and in the upper right-hand portion of the landing page, click on upcoming events, and you can click on the HR department friend or foe, critical patient and caregiver safety events. Click on that for details, and you'll be able to download the slides. We'll also have future resources that will be available on that page, and I've now clicked, for those that have the slides, on page 6, and our two speakers today, Cynthia Shapiro and Perry Bechtel, are both on that. Their pictures are on that page, and we'll also be providing future resources that you can download from that page. On slide 7, if you wish to follow us on Twitter or Facebook, and we'll be updating a lot of our social media over the next 60 to 90 days, the addresses are on that slide. On slide 8, our purpose is we will measure our success by how we protect and enrich the lives of families, patients, and caregivers. And today's message is all about our caregivers and some critical issues that pertain to them. Our mission is to accelerate performance solutions that save lives, save money, and create value in the communities we serve and the ventures we undertake. We look for projects, initiatives, and programs that will do all three of those simultaneously. On our disclosure statement, there are no products, services, or technologies that will be discussed. Our speakers have no formal or informal relationships with the pharmaceutical or medical device industry, and the disclosures are found on slide 9. So our speakers and reactors today, we have Cynthia Shapiro, a best-selling author in the area of HR, Perry Bechtel III, who is a college student and a leader of one of our MedTech programs, Dan Ford, a published author in patient safety, longtime leader and patient advocate, who will be our voice of the patient today, and I am your host. So it's my honor and pleasure always to introduce Dan Ford. Dan is a former search consultant in the healthcare industry for top leaders at healthcare institutions. He serves with Spectrum Health on the hospital group board quality and safety committee. He's been a collaborative member of our advocacy team at TMIT. He was a noteworthy contributor to the hospital-acquired conditions work that was submitted to CMS to help those be passed. And he was a contributor to the National Quality Forum Safe Practices as they relate to patients and the voice of the patient. He's also a veteran and was an aviator in the Vietnam War, and just an all-around champion for patient safety and quality. Most noteworthy is the fact that he has been an undying voice in getting us to see the value of including patients and families in the Joint Commission root cause analyses function after an adverse event. Dan, would you please kind of get our true north and help us focus on what we're going to do today?
I will, Chuck. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I'm honored to participate both as a patient safety advocate and today also as a former search consultant where I used to work with a lot of HR executives in my search work. This subject is extremely important. It's really been an under-the-radar subject matter because of the nature of the subject. That's unfortunate that it's stayed under the radar, but I'm hoping that the kind of sunshine that you're putting on it through these webinars and through other means and others can really help to deal with the issues in a practical way. And also want to just welcome the participants in the audience. Hope you will find this beneficial, as well as the faculty members. Back to you, Chuck.
Thank you, Dan. We are just so blessed to have you as a patient advocate and for your constant service and support. So my job initially, before we introduce the interview with Cynthia Shapiro, is to address the news update and our national webinar results. Just a few minutes ago, we added this slide, which is an update on the overdose issue from synthetic marijuana in Connecticut. There were a total of over 25 overdoses in a very short span of time. 71 people had ODs, and a number were given Narcan to reverse the process. So an absolutely critical issue, and we've addressed this in our MedTac program that we've been discussing, the 8 leading causes of death of young persons and adults and kids. An article just came out August 9th, and I am on slide 14, regarding active shooter response at healthcare facilities. Terrific article. We'll be doing a short video briefing to address these topics. This is a major focus area which got us into the MedTac program, which is focusing on the 8 leading causes of death of children and adults, and we're addressing schools, churches, formal organizations, and healthcare. And I really advise you to take a good look at this excellent article that is a quick summary of the number of events, what's been undertaken, and what is being undertaken at this time. It's a good one for you to present to your teams. I'm going to turn the agenda over to Perry Bechtel, who's sitting with me today in California. Perry is one of the 2018 Global Pete Conrad Patient Safety Award winners this year for 2018. He is our first master MedTac instructor and has started a program at the University of Florida. He's worked with us as an instructor at Stanford University, where the first college program was rolled out. And we'd like to invite Perry, who's a pre-med student, recruiting pre-med students, to give us kind of an update on the MedTac program. For those of you that are unfamiliar with the program, we've targeted the 8 leading causes of death. It started with active shooter events and working with the severe bleeding and Stop the Bleed program. But as you see, sudden cardiac arrest, choking and drowning, opioid overdose, anaphylaxis, the major trauma with major bleeding and severe bleeding being one of them, common accidents, transportation accidents, and bullying, including workplace violence. And so what I'd like to do is just turn the mic over to Perry. Perry, it's such an honor to have you with us today and talk to our audience.
Thank you, Dr. Denham, for that kind introduction. So I've been helping Dr. Denham and assisting with MedTac by starting a course at the University of Florida. And so in the spring of 2018, we debuted our first course, and we kind of advertised it more to the pre-med students because this was the group that'd be most interested, most helpful. And it was astounding that how these are super involved pre-med students, but how few were actually familiar with bystander care. So we had tons of interest in expanding it. We had around 15 students in our first class, and almost half of them would love to return and become future instructors for the course. So the coming plan for this fall is we're trying to operate courses every 1 to 2 months at the school, and hopefully with up to almost 30 students per course, just with materials and time being a limiting factor. But it is really just incredible what this course teaches and the practicality of it in places such as college campus, where first responders struggle to get around to different buildings, different classes, and every minute counts in different sort of health emergencies.
Great. Thank you, Perry. And Perry's background is as a lifeguard and an expert at ocean rescue. Has had a lot of terrific training. He's here with us in California this week to get his certificate as a Stop the Bleed instructor with the American College of Surgeons, and as of Sunday afternoon, he'll be a CPR AED instructor with the American Heart Association, which we're requiring of all of the instructors at schools and scout groups as well as churches. And the MedTac program, entirely free, 3 hours of online training and then 5 hours of engaging someone to come out to teach CPR and stop the bleed. They're paid directly, so not a penny leaves a community. They're able to engage their folks. So other things in the news that you should be aware of, that Amazon, Google, and IBM are pledging to help support health data standards and interoperability to make data available. I won't get into whether this issue. I think it's one we need to keep our eye on, and it's absolutely critical that we get this issue of interoperability addressed. Although it's taken much longer than we thought. Now, secondly, my job is to kind of review what we covered last month and the survey results from last month. We had Dr. Stephen Swenson, who is one of our absolute global national treasures in the area of patient safety, quality, and leadership. He was the former chairman of radiology in Rochester at the Mayo Clinic, where, incidentally, Perry Bechtel has done a research project this summer. His dad is actually a Mayo Clinic anesthesiologist in the neurosurgery group. Dr. Stephen Swenson was the head of radiology in Rochester. He went on to become the head of quality when we got to know him many years ago, and then went on to be the medical director for professionalism and leadership at Mayo Clinic. He now works part-time with the Intermountain Healthcare and has an upcoming book, From Burnout to Esprit de Corps. And Nancy Conrad was a speaker as well, announcing the Pete Conrad Global Patient Safety Award. When we ask our audience, are you interested in additional information on caregiver burnout, we had a very strong response. So we are going to invite Dr. Swenson to come back with some other experts to address this issue in another way. One of the other articles that has recently come out, but it was on a blog, we didn't include it in the slide deck, was moral injury of our caregivers that is a contributing factor or part of this burnout issue. So our audience last month was very positive on having more on caregiver burnout, which we'll address. On slide 23, I won't read the bullets, but you can read through the detail and see if this aligns with what you believe to be important. Dr. Swenson's book will come out in spring of 2019, and however, he's willing to speak to us about the features of this and really what one can do in an organization to tackle this. We asked the question, are there new patient safety issues that are keeping you up at night? And 40% of our audience gave that a 10. 56% agreed, with 46% strongly agreeing, which would be an 8, a 9, or a 10. And the topics that were covered, and briefly, as you look at these: cybersecurity, electronic documentation, EMR, opioid overdose, sepsis keeps coming up, suicide keeps coming up as what's keeping them up at night, unsafe nursing staff ratios, and again, the electronic records. So we will be addressing these in upcoming webinars. So that being done, I'm right on time. We're 13 minutes after the hour. I'm going to provide an introduction to our speaker today, who provides a certain view of the HR department, friend or foe. I thought it was critically important that we have both the positive and the more negative aspects and have some balance. And one thing that came out in the last month was an example of a surgeon in training was falsely accused of wrongdoing in a plaintiff attorney's lawsuit. Unfortunately, he wasn't the physician, and this went viral with the web, and now the internet has wonderful positive attributes, but the negative attributes are, as Mark Twain would say, and it's probably much faster than that. He said that a lie can go around the world twice by the time the truth gets its shoes tied, and it's much faster now that wrongful information and accusations that can damage a career can happen. This happened to this physician, and the lawyer recanted their story. However, this has destroyed this doctor's reputation, and the power of the internet is so critical. He's spending $900 a month just to try to reclaim his name online, having a very difficult time getting employed because it's hard for him to clear his name. And this frequently happens, as we know, when HR records are released by an organization as part of the narrative, or what you will hear Cynthia Shapiro talk about in terms of how an image can be crafted as a defensive or offensive sort of approach. Another article that was this year on HR is to look at the Forbes article regarding HR departments must urgently become human capital departments. And you're going to hear from Clayton Christensen. I've got some interview information from Clayton Christensen and from two other advocates of a very positive approach to HR. Ann Rhodes is a good friend. We have partnered on a number of HR issues, and she was the former head of the people systems leader, or the chief people officer for Southwest Airlines, pioneered a lot of the wonderful cultural attributes of that, and she was the co-founder of JetBlue, which was a highly successful startup that has now been that is now a national airline that was started in, of all places, New York City, and they focused on 5 core values and tried to make sure that their leaders would live those values. So please roll tape of her comment regarding this important subject.
To me, a great leader pulls those words and those values that are on the wall off the wall, and they literally live them and breathe them every time they touch a patient or a caregiver in the organization. Every single caregiver and every single patient sees what the values of the organization are by watching the behaviors of the leaders.
So Ann really has done a terrific job in her book, Built on Values. Highly recommend it. She has really pioneered the concept that leaders drive values, values drive behaviors. The collective behaviors of your organization are its culture. So you can't define what your culture is. Your behaviors define that, and the core values led by the leaders do. Again, very positive approach, and a lot of great organizations have done this. And again, I think this is the counter view of some of the things that have been going on in HR. And I would say that she's probably one of the most ethical and inspirational HR leaders in our country. The second person is my partner on projects at Harvard, who I met when I was an advanced leadership fellow at Harvard, is Clayton Christensen. Terrific book, How Will You Measure Your Life? Again, a real champion of an ethically based approach at HR and leadership, and a real pioneer of disruptive innovation and work to be done, a number of really amazing concepts. And to say that on one hand, he taught us so much about leadership, on the other hand, just pure business, his disruptive innovation work with Intel drove $25 billion in sales. So is it good business to do the right thing? I think leaders like this and mentors like this are incredible. Please roll tape of Clayton Christensen.
Do you believe it's possible that we can bring joy back to the caregivers' lives in our healthcare system?
Oh, absolutely right. And the opportunity to help others isn't just between the professional and the patient, but the professional and other professionals, helping every one of them to become better people.
This is very hard when prestigious schools like Harvard and other great schools have taught the tools of being an extractologist, how to extract the most amount of financial wealth from a system over the shortest period of time, to some degree robs us of the opportunity of investing in the joy that can occur with sustainability and the joy that people can have on the job. Is that an unfair statement?
No, you're exactly right. And it's not consistent within ourselves, because our people will look at renewable energy and say, you don't want to just suck out a one-time opportunity to use that energy from the earth. We got to bring it from renewable sources. And yet we'll look at our people and say, let's just use them, as opposed to it's renewable. And in fact, if what you're trying to do in managing your company is make better people, not just make the products. The products that you make and the profitability you create is a byproduct of making other people better. It can create a business organization that's not like anything that we have seen before. There are no trade-offs.
So a terrific mentor of many of us that had the opportunity to work with him at Harvard, and he has just done a terrific job of helping to lead us. Now, the next slide, slide 32, is Leaders Eat Last. And the reason that I have that in our deck is it really is a terrific lead-in to the next speaker, which is Bob Chapman, the CEO of Barry Waymiller. And Simon Sinek uses the story of Barry Waymiller and how Bob Chapman is leading a company where their decisions are focused on helping people become better people, making better people, and that their job is to bring forth the gifts of those people. And if we have a good economic model, our company's going to do well. And he did just what Clayton Christensen is saying. Now, Bob, since that book came out by Simon Sinek, a terrific book by Bob has come out called Everybody Matters, The Extraordinary Power of Caring for Your People Like Family. And we've had the opportunity of putting Bob and Clayton Christensen in our Discovery Channel films, Surfing the Healthcare Tsunami, Bring Your Best Board. We went and visited multiple sites of Bob Chapman's multinational company and found the same thing in every one of them, that every one of the employees we talked to, we had access to all of them, really felt that the company was helping develop them into better people. And many of them said, I am a better dad, I am a better mom, I am a better son or a better daughter because of working for this company. And Bob has just an amazing vision and is currently one of our greatest business leaders. He has almost triple the profitability of Berkshire Hathaway. So if somebody is just a hard nuts and bolts dollar-focused person, he's been able to prove that doing this can triple one of our wealthiest leaders and one of our most successful companies. Please roll tape on Bob.
When you create an environment where people can feel valued, trusted, safe, that they engage these experiences together, and we see in them things that we never thought were possible. It allows us to see the beauty in every human being. Ordinary people that do extraordinary things. It seems radical, but it clearly is so natural. If we're not caring for the very precious human beings that are delivering that care, how are we ever going to allow the patients to experience our goal of compassionate and safe care when they're under our stewardship? We measure our success by the way we touch the lives of people.
So Bob's, the last statement, and sorry about the music in the background, but that was the best clip that we had to be able to have you really hear his passion and what he was saying, and that is the vision statement of his organization. Now, the fourth person that we interviewed for this program before moving on to Cynthia Shapiro is an HR attorney who, for many years, was the attorney for Frito-Lay, went through a number of employee lawsuits, and never lost, and now advises organizations, and those are the organizations regarding this issue. And my interview of him was very, very fascinating in that what he found was the moment he would go into a company that was mistreating their employees, he would say, settle immediately. And the reason he was so successful in court cases with employees was the only ones that he ever took on were the frivolous ones. And if an organization had mistreated their employees in any way, like the ways that we're going to be talking about shortly with Cynthia Shapiro, he'd say, settle immediately, did the wrong thing, and do not push a bad position when you've behaved in an improper manner, which really was encouraging to me to hear an attorney that typically is actively representing the organizations. And so his organization, Reset the Clock, very fascinating, and go to their website. So in part of the setup to this, we're reminding you of some of the other leaders in this space. What I wanted to do was make sure to address the positive side of great leaders. So Ann Rhodes, Clayton Christensen, Bob Chapman. These are people that champion the cause of doing the right thing. And we'll talk about, can you serve two masters as an HR department? And I firmly believe that if you're of the ilk and you're a part of an organization where Ann, where Bob, where Clayton see this really focused approach at developing great people, you can really have a pretty close alignment of your interest. If you're in an organization that is objectifying the HR and objectifying employees, then you're at odds. And so that's where this cartoon comes. This is the type that might be at odds, and I'm kind of setting that up. Now, one of the topics that we've researched in the last couple of years is sham peer review, sham performance review in healthcare, defamation, false allegations, prosecutorial misconduct, and whistleblowers. Dr. Lawrence Huntoon is probably the leading expert, if you go and pull all of the papers, of which there aren't too many, but is a real champion of the cause of fighting sham peer review when caregivers are reviewing their peer and addressing it. His most recent article, we've shown his article before on the tactics of sham peer review, but now he's addressed the risk factors. The CNN exclusive coverage, if you are putting anything together in your organization, Dr. Ricardo Quarry is the physician who had the very challenging event that happened to him. And currently, Dr. Robert Van Boven is one that is experiencing this. Now, Dr. Huntoon defines sham peer review as an adverse action taken in bad faith by a professional review body for some purpose other than the furtherance of quality of care that is disguised to look like a legitimate peer review. This can happen to nurses, this can happen to pharmacists, this can happen to physicians. He's done a lot of work in the physician space. It's estimated that maybe 1 in 6 peer review processes have features of sham peer review, and he addresses a sham peer review as kind of like a kangaroo court, an elaborately scripted event intended to appear fair while the outcome is predetermined from the beginning. This is on a continuum of fraud, unethical behavior, crime. The article Tactics, Characteristic of Sham Peer Review is an excellent article. It addresses the issues that you see in the bullets there, and ambush tactic of secret investigations, depriving physicians of records, guilty until proven innocent, numerators without denominators when they're calculating, a physician or a nurse's behaviors, misrepresenting what the standard of care really is, trumped up or false charges. With physicians, the disruptive physician label. With nurses, it might be the troublemaker, dredging up old cases to justify a summary suspension, ex parte communications, hospital attorneys or conflicted attorneys used to influence the process, and then bias. So these are the tactics. Now, the risk factors that Dr. Huntoon has just come up with are who are more likely to have this happen? Solo physicians or physicians in small groups, and with nurses, those that may have small representation, economic competitors, whistleblowers, economic outliers, failures to meet revenue goals of hospitals because now we've been employing so many physicians, high-risk specialties, foreign physicians, innovators and entrepreneurs that create jealousy, highly competent physicians and caregivers or nurses that create jealousy, those independent physicians of which there are less and less, third-party free physicians, those that are older, and those who are targeted with personal animus. So if you look at on slide number 41, the side-by-side comparisons as you hear Cynthia Shapiro talk about across the board of multiple sectors, many of these characteristics are, or tactics and risk factors, are featured in what happens in the HR, the relationship with the HR department. There's an ebook that is available also, and you see The Power of Immunity and the Abuse of Trust, another excellent book. Now, Dr. Robert Van Boven is a physician, and we aren't going to take sides with this, but here's someone who felt strongly they should be a whistleblower regarding the care that was being delivered. You can go on the web and watch him on YouTube, and this is an example of somebody who said, look, there are quality issues, and was experienced a retaliatory response from the organization. Again, we don't know the facts, but this can provide more information about what can happen. Now, he has had 3 or 4 successful court settlements, and yet the battle still goes on. So very enlightening, and it kind of gives you a feel for speaking truth to power. And one of his quotes was, "Everybody likes a whistleblower, but no one wants to be close to the whistle." So so one needs to be really aware of the potential risk to you and your family when you are drawing attention to issues. Now, this is a potential proposed definition for sham HR review, a performance review undertaken in bad faith by human resources for some purpose other than the honest review of an employee's work, and that is disguised to look like a legitimate performance review. It follows the same logic as the peer review and the sham peer review. Some of the tactics are papering the file, which you'll hear from Cynthia Shapiro, surprise assessments, and a number of behaviors that are similar to what we've just seen. We just want to draw your attention to the Healthcare Innocence Project. This is a project that we're participating in now that is using electronic records, electronic HR records, and the electronic medical record to actually bring forth the justice that's necessary for especially nurses, but also physicians and pharmacists when the HR or some other power at be in an organization or an external organization has unfairly or unjustly put the caregiver in jeopardy. The new technology at that time when the Innocence Project was founded was DNA, and DNA has been used now to reverse and bring justice to situations of those that were falsely accused and falsely convicted. The new technology in our realm now is the medical record and the HR record, because these records now leave footprints, and they are very, very hard to fabricate, falsify, backdate due to the nature of forensic analysis of electronic records. So as an introduction to Cynthia Shapiro, her latest book is Corporate Confidential: 50 Secrets Your Company Doesn't Want You to Know and what to do about them. The focus, and you'll hear her talk about her appreciating the term weaponizing HR after an accident. Is the barrel defining the bad apple to reduce corporate liability? Is the barrel the policies and systems, or is it the apple that has gone bad? And this issue of intimidation of employees and whistleblowers through HR, is that technically workplace violence? The experts we've consulted say it is. Is it an insider threat? The experts we've talked to have also said that it is. So this is a potential threat or a risk. Now, this is the bridge to nowhere picture on slide 48, brought to us actually by Don Berwick, first in our performance improvement programs, when he used it to describe how things have changed and how pre-existing structures have to adjust to what's changing or become irrelevant. Now, so the question is, what do you do with a bridge when the river moves? The often cited bridge to nowhere in Honduras was intended to span the Choluteca River. Enterprises are dynamic. They have to evolve with the internal and external environments and threats. The question is, how must our HR departments evolve to make sure that they're not part of the problem? So it is a real pleasure to introduce Cynthia Shapiro. She's been a leader, a former leader, HR leader. She's currently an employee advocate. She's a best-selling author of books focused on this. And the reason that I showed Bob Chapman, Clayton Christensen, Ann Rhodes is the counter-argument of great organizations that are built on values, that aspire to be great leaders, where the core values really are lived by the leaders, because I wanted the positive counterpoint to now what you'll hear as we listen to Cynthia Shapiro, because we wanted to make sure that we are not appearing to make vast generalizations. There are great organizations. I've had the joy of working with a number of them in healthcare that actually live the values. Mayo Clinic in Rochester is just one of them. But what we did to set up the interview with Cynthia Shapiro was we needed to brief her on some of the facts about healthcare, that we have 4 to 5 times the frequency of workplace violence per the GAO report in 2016. More than 2/3 of our staff are afraid of reporting medical errors. This is the ARC study of over 1,100 hospitals that continues to go on. More than 1/3 of healthcare workers are afraid to speak up when a medical error is occurring. Medical errors and harm are the 3rd leading cause of death. Dr. Macri, the BJM report study. For-profit and non-profit healthcare organizations frequently make the caregiver the bad apple to save the barrel. This happens a lot. We all know it. Opposition research is immediately done to discredit the patients and families regarding a medical error when there's a potential malpractice case. In my 35 years in working in healthcare and working in patient safety, every case I've seen, there's an attempt for opposition research to find out how the patient and family can be discredited if it goes to court. Boards frequently are thought of by many to be a mushroom farm who are kept in the dark, fed solid waste to protect the professional managers. Boards, what most people don't realize is boards actually are the credentialing body of physicians. However, many of them don't know that duty. The internet, press, and blogs are being used as a pre-trial damage control strategy to craft an image, craft the narrative regarding the opponent of a potential malpractice suit or an HR suit, and that's very well organized. And then we discussed the Innocence Project, the Healthcare Innocence Project, to just set that up. So what I'd like to do now is have Kyle roll the tape of the interview, please. Cynthia, we are so pleased to have you with us today. For the people who are unfamiliar with your book, can you give us a perspective on HR today?
I certainly can. I was in human resources for many, many years. I went all the way to the executive level, and it changed so dramatically while I was there that I ended up leaving and switching sides, which is what I now do. I'm more of an employee advocate, and that's why I wrote the book Corporate Confidential. When I first started in human resources, it was more like an employee concierge. The whole idea was you're there for the employees. You deal with a lot of things so that managers don't have to. You take care of benefits and barbecues, and you keep the employees happy and all moving forward. And that's really what attracted me to it in the first place. But as I worked in HR, what happened over time, and it was kind of like the frog in the boiling water. You know, if you put a frog in boiling water, it'll jump out right away. But if you put it in there and gradually raise the temperature, it'll just sit in there and boil to death. That's what happened to me in HR. It was such a gradual shift. One day I woke up and HR had completely changed. It had become the protection arm of the company. And with organizations being so afraid of lawsuits, they actually became afraid of their own employees. And they put human resources in charge of protecting the company from their own employees. And so what was happening was the marketing for HR, the message of HR never changed. We have open doors. Come talk to us about anything. We're here for you. We're here to help you. If you feel like you're being sexually harassed or treated unfairly or you're having problems with a coworker or a boss, we're here for you. What the employees didn't realize is that there was now a secret edict going on in human resources. That if you came in with a problem or an issue and it ran, in line with the company's interests, yes, HR can help you. The moment your issue runs counter to the interests of the company or even smells like something that could cost them money or cause them to have a big, long, expensive lawsuit, HR is required to move against you. And that involves a lot of things that drove me out of HR, including creating documentation after the fact, setting an employee up as a bad apple or blacklisting, setting them up to be laid off, managed out, which basically means you give them all the worst jobs and you make their life miserable and you make it so they can't be successful so that then you can terminate them. All these things have been going on in the name of protecting the company, and organizations have gotten really good at getting HR to drink this Kool-Aid because they say, well, you're in charge of protecting the whole organization, and if the organization goes down, then we won't be able to employ these people, and these are just bad eggs that you're removing to protect everyone else's job. So it's very subtle, and I think a lot of human resources people don't even recognize really what's going on. But it's a conflict of interest, and that's the issue across the board, and that's what I've been trying to holler from the rooftops, is that you can't have someone helping the employees and protecting the employees when their paycheck is being cut by the organization, because they're going to have to protect their jobs before they protect the employees.
Well,
so that's where we are today.
You have really, and we are feeling this in a big way. Now that you have some of the facts regarding healthcare, regarding our incidents of workplace violence, and our fear that the federal government's even found of being afraid of reporting medical errors and that kind of thing, and the organized approach of creating the bad apple. Can you comment regarding what you see and what you've heard about in healthcare?
It's shocking. I mean, I'll tell you, your numbers are shocking. But it's the same issue. It's the exact same issue going on in healthcare that's going on across corporate America. It's just that in healthcare the stakes are so high that what you're seeing is a greatly amplified version of this issue. And it's certainly gotten to a breaking point. I mean, it's an unsustainable situation that you've got going on here, and I think everyone listening recognizes that.
One of the things that most people don't realize is that our boards of directors actually credential the doctors and are responsible for the quality of the organization. But even those boards, the studies have shown, are even unaware what their quality level is, and most of them think they're higher quality than they are. Any comment regarding boards of directors and what your thoughts there?
Oh boy, another conflict of interest, truthfully. Because boards of directors are not privy to the actual information, they can be very sheltered, and they can be, fed what certain people at the top want them to know. They can get really clueless really quick, and they're just a figurehead. And I've worked with many companies where the board of directors was just completely in the dark and happy to be so, and it was, the CEO and the COO and, high-level people that were keeping them in the dark so that they wouldn't really know what was going on, because that conflict of interest I'm talking about, I mean, when a board of directors finds out what's really going on, things happen like replacing the CEO. So the CEO has a vested interest in keeping them in the dark and feeding them positive information and trying to clean up messes by sweeping it under the carpet. So it's another brilliant example of a conflict of interest.
Are you surprised to find how frequent that HR and an organization will do opposition research against the caregiver and then opposition research against the families and patients that have had medical errors?
Unfortunately, no, not at all. I've just seen it so many times. I've seen it over and over and over again. I mean, most of what I do today is help employees and counsel managers and counsel employees that have been caught in the middle of this. If your job, if you've been shined on to believe that your job is protecting the company and that you're doing this wonderful thing or protecting the organization, then these become established practices that you are taught to do. And if it's fed to you in a certain way, it's really hard to see how damaging and how bad it is, because you're taught to truly believe that you're protecting the organization. And it can go really far. It can cross the line to where you damage people's careers and damage people's reputations, and in the case of healthcare, kill people without ramifications. And so some of these people that are doing this, believe it or not, think they're doing a good thing by protecting the organization so it will be there for others, and they don't realize how damaging what they're doing is.
now with the internet, and there's so many wonderful things about it, and we can leverage it in so many ways in healthcare to improve the quality of care, but there's the dark side of pretrial damage control and defamation and disqualifying a caregiver. Do you see that in other sectors, the way that we see defamation and statements being made to position and control the narrative?
Oh, sure. I mean, when something's going to go, through the legal channels, you'll see it everywhere. I mean, you see it in, in sexual harassment cases, where they do everything they can to make the person making the claim look like they, like they're a slut, or like, it's their fault. It's a common practice in the legal system, but now you've got the organizational human resources that are helping to support it. And when you've got something like that, you've just got this juggernaut of paperwork that they are able to create and image crafting that they are able to do. And each part is doing their piece, but you put it all together and people don't have a chance. I mean, the other people that are on the other side of that, they don't have a chance against that kind of barrage of paperwork.
Cynthia, the Innocence Project that was started 25 years ago by attorneys using a new technology of DNA was able to exonerate so many people who the system had kind of picked to be, the guilty one or the patsy or whatever. Now the Healthcare Innocence Project is built on another new technology, that being electronic records. Is the fact that all the HR records, or most of them, and patient records in our case for healthcare, are electronic with time dates and breadcrumbs, is that protecting us, or is it hurting us? Or what would be your take on where we're heading now that HR records are electronic?
That's going to help tremendously, and it is going to help in your efforts. And it does make, the job of fabrication more difficult. But I fear what's going to happen is more of an underground campaign, kind of a smear campaign of, smearing someone's image and reputation and that kind of thing. And sometimes that can be even more hurtful than generating documentation. You essentially make the person look like the worst employee in the world or the most problematic person just by smearing their image overall.
Right, and that can be done and is being done, we're seeing in healthcare, but within the internet, and kind of preemptive strikes now with the narrative. Is that correct?
Yeah, you can hire. There are actually organizations you can hire to just smear somebody across the internet. And you can very quickly create things that make someone look like a terrible person. So even if they have a good record, a good formal HR record, you can still smear them to the point where you would influence a jury or sway things legally, or even get a lawyer to walk away and say, "Hey, I'm not going to take this case because it's not going to go anywhere. You don't have an image that people are going to trust."
Well, we have a case for you that'll come up here shortly to get your comments on where that happened. So our first case that we'd like to have you comment on is a physician leader at a major medical center who had significant primary clinical duties, but also led another service. It was an educational service. And she was presented with a negative performance review regarding that service, that extra service, by the administrator responsible for it. However, this was not presented to her in adherence to the written policy of having her get to see it before it was given to her clinical chairman for her main core work, who was her boss. That negative review then was part of the fabric of the DNA of her records, and she never got to be able to respond to it or rebut it, and that then was applied and had impact on her overall career, her bonus, her professional advancement, her tenure track, without having her have the opportunity to defend her work. And in the end, it turned out that the intention was just to cut the funding to that service, and since it was a life-saving educational service, it was just easier to discredit it and the leader to be able to then justify cutting the budget. Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, it's a great example of how across the board we've really lost our idea about caring for the employees, So many organizations are more interested in doing what's easy or doing what's going to look politically correct. I mean, I hear a story like that, and I just think cowards, that they would destroy someone's career just to make their life easier and so that they wouldn't have to deal with the ramifications of their decision. And all throughout human resources, you can slam somebody with a performance improvement plan or slam them with something that they didn't even earn, some written documentation or some written thing that says you're not doing your job. And the employee can do a rebuttal. You can type up a rebuttal. And they'll even, put that in your file, but most often it just gets thrown away. It means nothing. The word of the company, the word of HR is always taken over the word of the employee. And so even if this individual was able to do a rebuttal, once that kind of documentation is submitted, even if it doesn't have anything to back it up, or if you can prove later on that it was to, get something accomplished, like closing this particular thing, that employee really has very little recourse.
Now, should that employee, we'll get to this in a minute, if that employee had a quick crisis management advisory team and be able to have legal counsel immediately, like within days of this happening, is there a way to kind of reverse the process, and will that be a help?
It would be nice to think so. I would like to think so. I would have to see, that kind of thing in action. But, documentation that comes from an organization can just be so damaging. People just believe it. It would be hard, I think, to even, if someone gave her a lawyer and helped walk her through it, that's one thing. But if she were to go try to find a lawyer, the company's word is the company's word. Even if they don't have anything to back it up, that's their perception, and they're allowed to submit documentation on that. So it's very, very difficult to stand up for your rights. Companies have gotten really good at finding out where the gray areas are, and they know exactly how to skirt along that edge so that what they are doing is unfair but not illegal. It's not strictly illegal.
Wow.
And so as long as they skate that edge, they can accomplish a lot on the negative side that an employee really can't do much about, and that's the real crime.
Wow. So in your book, Corporate Confidential, of the 50 secrets, if people wanted to know more that might be in your book about this kind of issue, them not following the policy, are there any sections of your book you might recommend?
It really runs across. I thought when we started talking about this, it would run across so many of the different secrets, but it really does. Number 6, talking to HR can cost you your job. It's like, come on in, we're here for you, and then they're going to act against you. Or number 4, it's dangerous to do what your company says. You have to look, within the system as far as an employee goes. You have to look at what your company truly protects and rewards and how it truly reacts to things, not what it gives lip service to. The lip service usually doesn't match what's really going on. And, you can't blame these employees for trying to protect themselves and not coming forward, because they're going to be turned into these, bad apples, or there's going to be some sort of smear campaign. If they're paying attention and they see what's happening, of course they're going to be afraid to come forward. And then that lowers the standard of care for everyone, because mistakes happen and no one wants to say anything.
Right. So second scenario, so after a medical accident or a medical error or a patient dies, we do what we call a root cause analysis that is actually required by those that certify hospitals. So in this case, a patient died of overwhelming infection called sepsis. And when the root cause analysis did not address the lack of responsiveness of an attending physician who was found later to be have been impaired, and as more facts came forward, that the leadership team had endorsed this physician, but the nurse brought it up in the root cause analysis and said, I know we did a good job once. It looked like she was, going to die, but what about those hours before that when there was no responsiveness and no IV fluids and no CT scan and no follow-up, despite the fact that the nurses were notifying this physician who ultimately, it turned out after a lawsuit, that had been impaired. What happened was that the nurse was presented with what appeared to be a fabricated PIP, a performance improvement plan, by both the nursing supervisor and HR. It was clear it was fabricated with damaging and inaccurate information and post-dated. The dates had been changed. This nurse had never seen the written policy, and it was clear that they were weaponizing HR to quiet the nurse. So given that they were employed by the hospital, your thoughts there. And this is an issue where, again, weaponizing HR against to create a bad apple to then protect the barrel.
Yeah, weaponizing is the right word, and that's the real problem with what's going on here. That individual might actually have a pretty good case if it's clear, if they have evidence that things were fabricated, that they really didn't do those things, and it was inaccurate, and that the dates were changed. Because when you can prove that kind of thing, a judge is going to respond pretty strongly. But these types of investigations, even though the stakes are so much higher in healthcare, these go on in human resources in corporate America every day. Whenever someone comes forward with some sort of complaint, like sexual harassment, a formal investigation has to occur. But if the person you're investigating, and I've seen this happen so many times, is a juggernaut in the company, maybe it's the CEO, maybe it's the top salesman that brings in millions of dollars, someone's going to show up in the doorway of HR and say, make this thing go away.
Right.
And you have to do it. And so you do the formal investigation, but you don't write everything down. You do it in a certain way. You can steer it in a certain direction. And in the end, there's no, you're not able to prove what this employee claimed. And now this employee is seen as a troublemaker for taking up everyone's time. And they're treated accordingly. And that's the beginning of the smear campaign when really they were asking for help.
Right. Of your secrets, anywhere you would recommend to dig into your book?
We're back to number one. The law cannot protect your job. One of the biggest mistakes employees make is they believe that their organization is going to follow the law, but they're not going to if the law is not on their side. If the law is going to hurt them, they're going to go against you. So, people believe that they have rights. I have a lawyer friend who says that you should have a passport when you walk through the doors of an American or corporation or organization because your rights pretty much stop at the door.
Wow.
And, you don't have right to free speech. You don't have the right to all these, freedoms and liberties that we all enjoy. And so people hear about laws that have been passed, or they know a little bit about their rights, or maybe they're totally kept in the dark about their employee rights, which most companies want them to be, and they go for help, or they do something that they think they're going to be protected in, and the company seizes it as an opportunity to jump on them and make them the fall guy.
Right. So our next case is an emergency medicine nurse is verbally abused by a patient and their family during the care of a patient late at night when the emergency department is overwhelmed. The only witnesses of the event are the family due to short staffing. And as you and I have discussed, we've got 4 to 5 times the workplace violence of any other sector. And one of the kind of the sharp end for us is the emergency department. The patient and the family make a formal complaint against the nurse, who are part of a wealthy family in the community or benefactors to the hospital. The nurse is put on suspension and feels she's going to be made the bad apple.
Oh, boy. That's a hard one, because if the family are benefactors to the hospital will do anything to protect those people. They're just not, it's a conflict of interest again. They're not going to act on the side of the nurse, no matter how conscientious she was. It's kind of a perfect example.
Does speed a critical issue? So if one of our caregivers is in an environment where they know, and I'm starting to learn the maxim President Reagan, used the Russian proverb of trust but verify. I'm starting to believe that it should be distrust until verified. And if you have to do that with HR, is speed really important in terms of engaging legal counsel and kind of a crisis management approach and documentation so that the discussions have attorney-client privilege? And if one were to be able to get that immediate response and be able to be represented, am I wrong to presume that would help a lot, or do you think that
It would, yeah. It would certainly help a lot. I think a lot of these problems happen because employees don't know their rights. They get blindsided. They're just out doing their job and doing their thing. I mean, sometimes you will get negligence, and that's going to be a problem. But for the people who are completely innocent and caught in the middle, yes. I mean, I think immediate representation would be extremely helpful. I mean, if you think about it, we had the same issue in our police force. So many people were claiming problems with the police. They had to start wearing video cameras, so that there is no dispute. The video cameras are always on, and that's how bad it got. I don't know if healthcare is going to go in that direction, but what you're looking at is these employees at all different levels are going to be forced to protect themselves somehow from being falsely accused or smear campaign.
And another thing that puts them in real jeopardy is HIPAA. So they can't take pictures and film the way you might be able to in an auto parts store or at a convention or whatever else. The two-party recording laws are different in every state, but we've got HIPAA protecting the private privacy, and we're seeing that being weaponized to say that boards can't even know about a malpractice case or about an employee's position because the legal counsel says because of HIPAA we can't share it with the board, which is
there
true.
need to be exceptions to all of that. I mean, I remember when they were talking about putting video cameras on police officers, they said, that's a violation of people's privacy, and they had to work around that because it's too important an issue.
Right.
When things get so out of balance, they have to really rethink these things. And they've been weaponizing a lot of things to protect themselves, but the pendulum has swung way out, and something has to bring it back to center.
So when something bad happens and your secret 12 is on email, you really make the point of you've got to be really careful. And I'm thinking of the second and third victim of a bad event. When somebody sees something going on and they even comment either way about something that happened to another employee, they're at risk.
Yeah, it's a paper trail. Every time you send an email or a text, it's a paper trail. And that paper trail can be used against you very, very quickly.
Right. So these are great, and we are so appreciative of your time. We just got a couple more really quick ones. So an adult nursing student is finishing her degree, has a high GPA, great reviews from all of her preceptors. She wants to be an ED nurse, so she applies to do her final 3-week elective in the emergency department, assigned to an older nurse who's continuously on her mobile phone, leaves the student alone with very high risk, very sick patients, and not providing guidance. So it's a patient safety issue. Student nurse looks up the procedures and has been told, I can request a different preceptor. That's okay to do. She did, but this was denied to her, and on the basis of that, they set up a meeting with the dean. She calls her brother, who's an attorney, who says, look, you shouldn't go without representation. She writes an email to that effect. The nursing school decides to cancel her degree right in the final 3 weeks.
Oh, wow.
She gets an attorney and who has an investigator follow up with the hospital and healthcare system, and they're told by HR or someone at the organization that she has been that they are suspicious that she was drug seeking. And on the basis of that, the attorney said, well, if they're going to take the position that you were doing that, I can't take this case. no history of drug abuse, and actually, because she was an older adult student, she wasn't doing a lot of recreational casual things. She wasn't living in her hometown, so she had formally applied to shadow nurses, had an ID badge, and was in the hospital doing that. But they turned that story into a drug-seeking behavior, and she's only got 3 weeks left to get her degree. What can she do?
Wow. Now, that is the power of messing with someone's image. That's why I said that can actually be more damaging and even more effective than crafting documentation after the fact. She would have to somehow prove, the best thing for her to do would be to take a drug test, like take a hair test where they can trace it back over months of time. Hopefully she has long hair, and to have evidence to completely disprove what they're claiming. This is one of those where you really have to fight back hard, because what she did, even though she was in the right to ask for a new person, it's very quickly you can be labeled as a troublemaker. And if you're labeled as a troublemaker, no one's going to want to hire you. No one's going to want to deal with you. They certainly don't want to let you get further into the organization where you could do something else. And it makes sense that they would even cancel her degree, because they don't want to graduate someone who is already labeled as a troublemaker, because they don't want that image for their school.
Right.
So, it was a very quick smear campaign. I think there was probably something else going on here. She must have stepped on some toes that, we're not hearing about in the story. Something happened that made them act against her so strongly and so swiftly.
So each of these cases, although they've been blinded by gender and by details, are all actual cases that you've heard, including the last one that we'll show you in a minute. In this particular case, this nursing program had been on probation, and it needed to have the clinical volume that was provided by offering a place for nursing students to go. So nursing students, they learn their in-classroom, but they also have to have the clinical experience, and if a local hospital denies the nursing program the opportunity to have that, or it's in probation, they don't want any complaints about bullying or adversity. So the very lifeblood of a nursing program relies on its clinical volume. And so although she followed the protocol procedurally to put anything negative on the relationship between the clinical volume facility and the nursing school puts it in jeopardy.
Well, that's the thing, so she got caught in the lip service. Here, I'm allowed to do this, so I'm going to do it. It would have been smarter, because, this whole thing is about employee beware. You really want to see, look at has anyone else ever done it, and what happened to that person?
Right.
Right. You want to look at those things before you act. Don't just say this is allowed, or this is within my legal rights, or this is fair, so I'm going to do it. Because every decision you make could be putting your job in jeopardy, and that's the same, obviously, in a hospital setting as well as in corporate America. You just got to be really savvy.
Right. Any more to read in your book?
There's so much. This covers. This really. you guys have the perfect scenario going on right here. This is what's happening in this industry. Is exactly why I wrote the book. Every single secret in here is something that's going on. I tell people, in your organization or your industry, you might have only 3 or 4 of these secrets, or you might have all 50. But you need to know what they are, so you know how to protect yourself, and you know how the system is truly operating from the inside out. And it's unfortunate that this is going on in the industry, because when you do have everything, it seems like almost everything bad that could be happening is happening. Eventually, it will get to a point of breakdown where people will have to take action, like you're already taking, and they will start to mobilize.
Right, as they have in the entertainment industry.
Absolutely. Huge mobilization going on in the entertainment industry. They're gonna completely reorganize that thing, and it's great. It needs to, because there was no checks and balances. And that's what you guys are dealing with, too. There aren't any checks and balances, and so movements like what you're doing here in the Innocence Project, this is what's going to get things to change. The more people you have pushing from this direction, and exposing the image. I mean, the example you just gave me, the organization acted to protect its image.
Right.
So if you guys are able to push back on the image, you will actually force them or inspire them to eventually do the right thing. But you got to let them know that someone's watching and someone's paying attention, and that there are a lot of people on the other side giving pushback.
Right. Excellent. Our final case is Physician A and Physician B are from two different institutions. They're undertaking collaborative research and co-author papers together. Physician A publishes a peer-reviewed article to specifically discredit Physician B, taking advantage of an opportunity to do so. The article is fraught with verifiable fabrication and falsification of information about her. Careful scrutiny reveals the article is a public sham peer review of Physician B. So in our environment, we have peers that review papers, and we also have something called peer review, where others in the community, might be virtual, might be physical, review the information and make a decision regarding their peer. Physician A did not declare his conflicts of interest, prior work with Physician B, and what funding he had gained from the work with Physician B, or what he could gain from the article. Physician A is rewarded by assuming positions once held by Physician B, which generate personal income to him. He applies for and receives federal funding of research previously undertaken by Physician B. So he's now discredited him in the medical peer review literature. The federal funding is granted to Physician A's organization. Physician A's violation of conflict of interest disclosure guidelines of the peer review journal are clear. However, the article's already published and in circulation. So here's publicly discrediting someone that then gives it that legs with image impact as well. And one more layer to add here is if a physician works for an academic organization, they can get away with saying, my organization has reviewed my conflicts of interest and find them satisfactory, and don't have to declare them.
Ooh. Well, I mean, this guy actually probably has a pretty good lawsuit. That's something where you need an external lawyer and you get to work on slander. But
the unfortunate thing, though, is that the times that these follow are after, the defamation. The period of time when one can file a lawsuit is pretty short with many states, 1 to 2 years.
Yeah, it is. It is. You have to act immediately. The witch hunt is a really common thing. You can see it in the Hollywood sexual harassment issues. Whenever there's an opening where people are allowed to do this kind of thing and there aren't checks and balances, people will take advantage of it, and then you get sort of a witch hunt mentality. So, you saw it in the entertainment industry. All you have to do is declare that someone was doing sexual harassment, and their entire career is destroyed. They can come out and say, no, it wasn't. They can even take it to court and prove it, but public opinion has already been taken care of. And there are gray areas that people take advantage of all the time. I've helped many people. I'm helping someone right now in the healthcare industry who is the victim of a smear campaign. He's a clinic manager and really good, and someone wanted his job. Actually, the boyfriend of one of the people that he manages, they got together. She claimed sexual harassment. She did a smear campaign. She got a bunch of people to give him a bad review, and he's in the process of being managed out so that her boyfriend can have the job. Whenever you have, big open areas with no checks and balances, you're going to get people who take advantage of that for their own gains, and it's really sad because once those wheels start moving, it's really hard to stop them.
Right. So so a lot of this is just, it's scary, it's threatening. However, as you and I had in our discussion before we started this interview, we have many organizations that are very ethical, that see what's going on and really want to take the high road, want to do the right thing. Perhaps maybe the last question is to comment on, can you give us a light at the end of the tunnel that's not a train? How can we work with HR in a positive way? We know that the old quote of a lie could go around the world before the truth gets its shoes on. But there's all this. The cards seem stacked against us, and yet on your secret number 49, leadership is not a pedestal, it's a foundation. For those organizations, because most of our audience are the champions of good, I believe, and they really are in it to win it for the cause of healthcare, or they wouldn't be on this webinar with us today. Can you give us some positive highlights of what HR departments can do, what CEOs, we have 10% of our audience are CEOs, what can we do in a positive way? What high road can we take to that shining city on the hill that we believe is there?
Well, like I said, HR has become a real conflict of interest, because if they're afraid of being fired for not doing what the company wants, then that's a problem. So, many people are calling for human resources to be an external entity that doesn't answer to an organization and is much more neutral. But that kind of neutrality can be created within an organization. And if there are CEOs listening, HR is going to do what you tell it to do. There may be an overarching organizational edict to protect the company, but even within that, you can really put the employees first and really create an air of fairness and create a neutral environment. If HR is allowed to act in a neutral way, it will, and it can. And it can do amazing things. It can remove the people that need to be removed and protect the people that need to be protected. But, it's a courageous thing to do because not everything is going to land on the side of the company. And so if people's jobs are in jeopardy when that happens, then there's going to be an issue. But a lot can be handled internally and confidentially to get things done appropriately and to make sure that people are really taken care of. Because, when the pushback happens, like what happened in Hollywood, it happens hard and fast and it gets away from you. You guys have the opportunity to see down the tunnel and see that things aren't working well and really make concrete changes now to keep that from happening, because you don't want it to happen without you. That's when you're really playing catch up and everything's falling apart and you're having to work things together on the fly. Partner with your HR department. If you're at a high enough level, they will partner with you, and you can sit down with them and say, look, this is how I really want this to operate. I know you have certain things you have to do, but how can we work together to make this more fair on all sides and really handle these things so that we're not just sweeping things under the rug? And they will. They will partner with you, and they will figure it out.
Well, thank you so much. You've just been tremendous. Maybe just one final statement regarding the pedestal versus the foundation?
Yes. The last part of the book is really about being a fantastic manager. And management skills aren't really taught today. There's no management training anymore. But being a really great manager is a platinum skill, and it inspires people, and it helps protect people. The problem is we've been taught to do management top-down as if we're on a pedestal and everyone is below us. It is so much more effective if you come in as a foundation, if you empower your people, if you are there to support them, so you tell them what to do, absolutely, but not necessarily how to do it. You figure out what they need to do, and you remove the obstacles in their way. And if human resources is one of those obstacles, then it is your job to neutralize that obstacle and take that on yourself so that people feel comfortable doing their jobs at their very highest and best. So it's this idea of creating a really strong foundation for people that they can trust and that they can go to without fear of retaliation so that they can work to their highest and best.
Well, thank you very much. You've been so generous with your time. Your book is terrific, and it has really been helpful. Thank you for giving us your time and helping us so much.
Well, I really support what you're doing. It's necessary. It's timely. It's going to help a lot of people, it's the right thing to be doing.
Well, thank you. God bless you. So this program clearly is very, with Cynthia Shapiro, has been very focused on the more negative side. However, we started with Ann Rhodes and Clayton Christensen and Robert Chapman. And if you would like more additional information, and we can bring those people to provide the positive side of the road to the shining city on the hill opportunity of really creating great organizations, and you'd like other additional information on HR issues, how to deal with the challenges of an adverse event today in 2018, let us know by indicating in the survey that Kyle has just put up in the right panel, and let us know so that we can address it. And then in the free text entry question, please put in the HR issues we may not have covered, and they might include opioid issues and drug diversion. We had a terrific leader speak about that earlier this year. Any of the HR issues related to patient safety and quality, go ahead and put them in free text entry. We would like to go back to our core clinical area, and on the next slide and in the survey, we're asking you about an update on the most common adverse drug events, and those in the area of opioids, anticoagulation agents, diabetic agents were the top three that the federal government identified. There are a lot of new things that have been going on. We'd like to know, would you like us to address the common adverse drug events? And if so, what those topics might be so we can make sure to cover those in our next webinar. I'm going to go to Dan Ford first. Dan, you have a unique perspective on what you've heard. I'm certain that you, in your search consulting years, addressed placing chief operating officers, CEOs, perhaps even HR leaders. You got kind of a balanced view from Clayton Christensen and Ann Rhodes and Bob Chapman, all who champion the cause of great HR departments of really great companies that have done a great job. And now we've heard the counterpoint from Cynthia Shapiro. You want to give us your reaction?
Yeah, I have just a few points, Chuck. Thank you. I was in search for 36 years. I've been retired 6 years. I watched the HR position grow from being the nice person in the organization who knew everybody, and somebody was appointed, it's your turn, you be the HR exec, to putting more people, people from the organization, sometimes outside the organization, had more training and skills. We now bring in people, many from other industries. And I was just thinking, well, while I was listening, that we've kind of gone the other way. We kind of need more of the nice person who knew everybody along with the skills. Okay, that's a piece of it. I see four key factors. One is got to have the total support of the CEO. In order to to balance what cannot be Switzerland, the HR director simply cannot be Switzerland because the paycheck comes from the organization. But if they have the integrity, the backbone, and the inclination to do what is right, meaning according to their true north, I think it can do a lot toward leveling the playing field. I agree with your balanced perspective as you summarize this, Chuck, that a lot of organizations are doing really good things. And in some ways, it's almost unfair to point out that HR is doing the weaponizing. And I know this has taken place with some of the experiences you become aware of. It's really a shared responsibility. The HR really has little operational responsibility. Sometimes they do. But all of these people have a boss. And the HR becomes a gatekeeper. They educate, they're record keeper, et cetera. And the bosses themselves can be much more heavy-handed. The culture starts at the top from the board, but then the CEO in terms of the operations and the chief operating officer. Sometimes you got a bad apple as a CEO, and it's going to cause this to happen. Most people try to do the right things. There is, I think, I learned at a patient safety camp a couple of years ago that the students who participated there said one of the things they learned is that they're not in this alone. And in this era of the internet and texts and emails and whatever, you got to believe there's an underground movement of a lot of information being exchanged among employees as they are chit-chatting about how they are being treated. And that's kind of the balance to the smear campaigns. It's not that anybody is smearing somebody they're working for, but they're just trying to reach out and say, how do I deal with that? So I got to believe that there's a lot of that going on. That's pretty much my, looking through my notes, my summary context here. Oh, the other thing is HR directors need mentors too. We all need mentors, and they got to make sure he or his or her job has to depend upon not only their heart and their own head and their brain, but developing a team of people that they can look to for guidance. Typically, that can come more from outside the organization than internally, but they have to be. I've watched them become very, very, very savvy people, particularly when they participate on strategy. That's it, Chuck. Thanks for asking.
So, Dan, before I go back to Perry where we started and kind of wrap up on the next steps on the MedTech work, we have a couple of minutes to address your championship of bringing patients and families into the root cause analysis and why it's so important. And can you help us understand the idea of inviting them, not necessarily making it a requirement, but perhaps inviting them to be involved in the benefits therein, because you've done some great work in that area. I know you're one of the only voices out there that we hear over and over again, and we've got a couple minutes for you to championship that cause.
Sure. I'll try to give you the really quick version of this. This, as you know, this has come out of my own family's tragic experience involving an opioid overdose through the PCA pump. And following 2 surgeries, and this was my first wife, went back to her room and overdosed on morphine. It took 21 minutes to call the code team was called right away, came right away, but it took over 20 minutes to intubate her, way too long. And there were a handful of other medical errors that happened too, but the bottom line is she has permanent brain damage, permanent short-term memory loss. We had a lawsuit that went on for 9 years, unfortunately. From day one after this happened, I tried to nail the risk manager who became the ambassador to deal with Dan Ford. His wife couldn't think. And we had 3 kids, terrible, terrible impact on our family. And I could never get straight answers. He was very condescending. He was he was a bad, excuse my language, he was really a badass. And he deliberately tried to behave that way. In fairness to him, I think he was doing the best job that he knew how, given what he had learned. We filed a lawsuit, 2-year statute of limitations. It went on 9 years. We had to quit the lawsuit because my wife lost interest. She had no idea what was going on anyway. During this whole time, all I really wanted to do was to sit down with the key players and say, what really happened? Just sit around a kitchen table and an office table and just say, tell me what happened. My inclination is not to file a lawsuit, but don't misunderstand me. Thought about this a lot. There are 3 steps in the usual root cause analysis. The first one is data collection. Secondly is evaluation of what happened. Third is a game plan for the future, which is the purpose of the root cause analysis. And I've thought and talked with so many people, and it's a tough slog because the industry just really doesn't want to do it very much, that the key word is invitation. Back to your pointed question, Chuck. I don't think you can require a patient or family to be involved, nor when you invite somebody to participate, patient or family member, they're not all going to accept. And invitation should not be extended to everybody for unique reasons. But say that there are 80% of the people that choose to accept the invitation, which I think should be extended during the interviews happening in the first round, and say, we're going on to 2 more stages of this. Would you like to be involved in those next 2 stages? And hopefully a number would do that. And to find out what happened, to help provide input and come up with ideas, I think this would help enormously in terms of collecting of information, in terms of healing, I can't imagine a physician or a nurse or other who have been involved with the medical error, didn't do it on purpose, it happened, spend the rest of their life dealing with the hurt in their heart and their head that they were part of, and somebody like risk management attorney CEO said, you can't talk to the patient and the family about what really happened. Maybe you do apologize in some way. Maybe you go with some sort of a superficial summary statement about what happened. But to just sit down and have a human-to-human conversation, that just hardly ever happens. It's happening ever so slowly. That's kind of my quick, talk fast summary, Chuck, and thank you for asking.
Thank you, Dan. Keep championing the cause. I think you've just been doing a great job there. We're going to finish on time. I am going to ask Perry Bechtel. We're so proud of these pre-med students that are championing the cause for patient safety and doing such great work. Just to refresh those from the beginning of our session that we introduced, Perry is a pre-med student from the University of Florida. You're here on the West Coast with us to get your certification in Stop the Bleed as an instructor, get your certification as a CPR instructor, but you're also here to help fashion and help develop our lifeguard surf program. There's some pretty unique injuries that occur along our beaches, both in lakes and oceans, and also this is a global program, and there are so many unique things. Do you want to maybe just address kind of the vision for what we're doing with the lifeguard surf program? And I'll preface this by saying we now have formal collaborations with lifeguard organizations on the West Coast here in California, in Hawaii at Waikiki, and likely be adding more as well. So I'm going to put Perry on just to close with and ask him about this vision of something unique for the waterways and that kind of thing.
Well, thank you, Dr. Denham. I'd just like to start by saying that a lot of people overlook kind of the risks and the importance of the lifeguards, especially in coastal areas, because they kind of fly under the radar. They aren't usually in the mainstream news, and people just think it's kind of in the same thing for the past 20 years. But the risks have really evolved, and I think the training has yet to catch up. It's training as well as equipment. And with the MedTech Surf program, we'd like to help implement new equipment for the lifeguards, like combat tourniquets, which aren't being used and are one of the most effective ways to stop major bleeding, which is a big risk between whether it be a major like collision, possible shark bite, something like that, but as well as opioid reversal drugs such as Narcan, which lifeguards have little to no training about. And just being on beaches and being public first responders, I think that's a really important piece, especially with the opioid crisis and everything that's been going on. So overall, I'd say we're trying to develop the MedTech Surf program to really help address some of these causes that aren't traditionally looked at as part of a lifeguard's duty, and especially the equipment that needs to be updated and isn't being currently provided to them.
Great. Many thanks to you, Perry, for that. And one of the first in the news stories that we put on were this enormous number of opioid overdoses that just occurred in the last few days in Connecticut. When I was in Hawaii and talking with lifeguards in Waikiki, as Perry said, I mean, you turn around behind the lifeguard stands, homeless people, a lot of drug use, and a lot of these things are kind of catching up. And the lifeguards, when somebody has a challenge, they turn and say, well, the lifeguard, I need help. And so I think that the work you're doing and the work that will be done with our leaders, Dr. Boats at MD Anderson and at Stanford, are going to have some impact. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today, and I thank you for listening to both the positive and the negative sides of the friend and foe. I thought it was really important that we cover both. Dan, I'd just like you to close us now. Thank you so much, Dan, for being such a great champion of patient safety, and we will close our webinar. He'll have the last word. God bless you all, and we hope you have a great rest of your August.
Thanks, Chuck. And one of the things I wanted to do is to share a quote from church last Sunday, which makes me apologize for the words that I used a few minutes ago. Sometimes my anger still is there, even though I long ago forgave. The theme of the sermon last Sunday was about contagious hope. And I'm going to borrow that phrase to simply say I have contagious hope for healthcare, even with some terrible things that have happened. But I work as an advocate. I'm very active at Spectrum Health and nationally. And I have a lot of faith, a lot of hope, a lot of trust, a lot of belief in the people who tirelessly work so very hard in the healthcare field, the clinicians and everybody else. And I just have faith that we can turn around what needs to be turned around and do better where we need to do better. Thanks, Chuck, and thanks, everybody, for listening.